Hello everybody, good afternoon I will say, because we are just into the afternoon. Hope you're all okay there. Thank you very much for joining us this lunchtime for our second UCAS session as part of the Supporting Progression series for the last 2 weeks now. We've had sessions running. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we do kick off properly and I introduce Charlie. So just to let you know, today we are using Teams Live. If you are new to Teams Live, just to give you the heads up that you hopefully can hear and see us, but we can't hear or see you, so you don't have your mic or your camera enabled. If throughout Charlie's presentation you are wanting to ask any questions, there is the Q&A function which should appear in one of the corners of your device. So you can send through any questions you may have throughout the presentation and we'll pick those up at the end. I'll go through those with Charlie as well. I know a few of you that are attending today may have booked onto the Tuesday session. So again, if you do have any questions from that session that we distributed the recording of, please do fire those through as well, and we'll ask Charlie them whilst we've got him on the call. That's pretty much everything from me though. What I'll do is I'm going to hand over to Charlie now. So we do have Charlie Smith from UCAS, who's going to talk us through supporting strong personal statement writing and how to write an effective reference as well. So as I said, fire any questions through as we go and we'll address those at the end, but I will hand over to you, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Jade, and good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. So as Jade said, there was a few issues on Tuesday. Sorry, if you bear with me. The joys of technology. There are a few issues on Tuesday, and I just wanted to briefly cover a couple of the key points I wanted to cover on Tuesday before we get stuck into personal statements and references. So the current cycle that we're in, the 2021 application cycle, has obviously been affected and impacted by the pandemic and by the recent lockdowns. So the January deadline was pushed back by 2 weeks to the end of January. And for students who are still going through the process, they may still be waiting for decisions from universities and colleges. Universities and colleges have until the 20th of May to make a decision, which is slightly later than normal. Again, that deadline was pushed back by 2 weeks to account for the extension to the January deadline. Students will then have to make their replies and respond to offers by the 10th of June. So once they've received all decisions, they'll have a deadline by the 10th of June to respond and make their replies. If students are still undecided, maybe they haven't been able to go and visit a university in person, or perhaps they are still not quite sure what the best option is for them, we still really encourage them to make their replies at this point. And they can always, if they need to, record a reply swap, and they can do that right through until the 24th of July this year. Looking ahead then to the summer, if you have students who haven't yet applied but are still interested in applying, they can apply right up until the 30th of June. And then thinking ahead to clearing, so that begins at the beginning of July. This year, as I'm sure you're aware, results day for both A-levels, BTECs and Scottish qualifications has all been merged to one results day on the 10th of August. This is obviously going to be slightly different to previous years, and we are still working with examining bodies and awarding organisations to finalise the details in terms of us getting the results and passing them on to universities and colleges. As soon as we have more information, UCAS, we will be running a teacher and advisor webinar, so do look out for that in our advisor newsletter over the coming weeks. So thinking ahead to the 2022 application cycle is now fast upon us. So next Tuesday, the 4th of May, is when courses for 2022 will become visible for students. You will then have access to the advisor portal in 2022 from the 11th of May. The setup of your school or college will be carried over from 2021, so any groups, any permissions that you've got will automatically be carried over. If you do need to make changes, you have a week until the 18th of May in which to make changes before your students will be able to start linking applications to you. So from the 18th then, students will be able to register using the UCAS hub and using the new application form, which I will go through in a bit of detail in a moment. And then they can't submit their application until the beginning of September, the 7th of September. So as is mentioned, we are for 2022 making quite significant changes to the application form for students, and I'm going to go through kind of the key changes now. The main one is that students will have one set of login credentials which they'll use for both their UCAS hub, their application form, and then also tracking their application. Basically what we've done is kind of, some would say kind of long overdue, is basically updated and improved this kind of layout of the application form and given it a much more modern feel. And I'll give you a screenshot in a moment. We've also made it easier for students to kind of find out information with the kind of improved help text and link to information which is relevant to them. The application fee has been increased slightly for applicants. So last year it was £26 for multiple choices. This year for 2022 it's £26.50, and the single application fee has changed to £22 in 2022. There are a few small changes around the questions that we ask in personal details in relation to Brexit, but all of that information will be clearly displayed and explained to students in the help text. So for those of you who haven't used the UCAS Hub, this is what your students will see when they come to create their UCAS application for 2022. If students have registered for the Hub before the 18th of May, on the 18th of May, this option here to start their application will automatically appear, so they won't need to re-register. Once they start their application, as before, what they'll need to do, if they want to link their application to your school or your college, they'll do so using the buzzword, and then it will be an on-screen wizard which will take them through the steps required. So as I said, the application form visually for your students is changing quite significantly. This is what they'll see. So those of you who are familiar with the previous application will notice that the layout's quite significantly different. It's much clearer, it's much easier to use. So you'll see here at the top, students have a kind of a status bar. Until this profile is showing 100% complete, students won't be able to submit their application, and they just basically work through each tile in their profile, completing it. Once they're ready, they add their choices by clicking on the Add Choice button, and once they're all set to go, then they'll be able to submit. Now, I appreciate for some of you who may be really familiar with the old way of doing things, we might be quite nervous at the prospect of supporting students through a new application form. I said we're hoping it's going to make things easier and more simple for students to navigate it and use UCAS. But we've created a huge range of free resource to support you supporting your students. So we've got presentations ready to be used in the classroom and at parents' evenings that can, have detailed screenshots and kind of how-tos at completing the application. We've also got a series of activities for students and lesson plans for you to use as well as the kind of other extensive information and advice which we've always offered. And there's a link here at the bottom of the page, and you'll get a copy of this presentation after today to all of this free resource. So thinking about then personal statements, so this is the first part. I'm going to cover personal statements initially, but then go on to writing references. So the personal statement is a big and important part of the UCAS application for your students. Students can apply to a maximum of 5 choices on their application, but they can only have one personal statement. So it's really important students understand that, and that their personal statement works for all of the choices on their application. The personal statement is a precise and concise piece of work, a maximum of 4,000 characters or 47 lines. Often we have students who have lots and lots of great things to talk about, and they write, 100 lines, 200 lines. So there's a real skill in making sure that they're providing the information they want, but they're not going into too much detail. And I'm going to go through a few techniques to make sure students are staying on point and on message with what's required within the statement. Built into the UCAS application form, there is no automatic spelling or grammar check. So what we recommend is students write their statements either in Word or something similar, and then when they're happy with it, copy it across into the UCAS application. Even though we've got the new application form this year, it still remains that we're not providing a spelling or grammar check. And obviously, applying for academic courses, is important that students are being as accurate as possible with this. There is also no way for students to kind of provide clever formatting, kind of any clever presentation layouts or sort of different sort of presentation skills. So it is all about the quality of text that students can write and can submit. As I'm sure you're aware, every single personal statement that gets submitted through UCAS is checked, and if it is found to have been plagiarised, we then will kind of take action. So in short, what happens is once a statement is flagged, we'll run a report which will highlight the plagiarised sections of the statement. This report will then be passed on to the students' chosen choices, and then it's up to the university or college then to decide what they do with that information. And what that report does is it shows, as I said, a percentage of how much has been copied, and also then shows the source for where that's come from. Every year we get a couple of thousand applications that for whatever reason are plagiarised, so really need to kind of stress to students the importance of making the personal statement their own work. This is what the personal statement will look like within the new application. Is it relatively similar to the old layout? Blank text box in which students need to effectively tell the university or college they're applying to why they're applying, but also help them kind of differentiate themselves from other students who are applying. Lots of students will be applying with similar grades, potentially even the same grades. So the statement is that real point of difference, and there's lots of different things and ways to do that. And I said I'm going to go through some top tips for personal statements as we go through this. I think it's really important to stress at the outset, though, there is no perfect way to write a personal statement. UCAS offers good practice in terms of advice for personal statements, but we're not the people who ultimately decide the merits of a personal statement. So students need to understand this. They need to do proper research into their choices to understand what universities and colleges are looking for before they write down, and start writing and drafting their statements. Ultimately, students need to, as I said, use the statement as a tool to differentiate themselves. They need to demonstrate they understand what they're applying for. If they're thinking of post-university career, what do they want their degree to help them to do? Is it a stepping stone to another qualification? Is it a route to a specific profession? Again, no right or wrong answer with this, but it's really important that students are understanding the full purposes of the statement. Whenever I work directly with students, I always try and keep it as simple as possible. I know students really stress about writing a personal statement, and they worry about things to include, things not to include. And I will go through some do's and don'ts in a moment, but ultimately, if students remember these 2 points on the board, they won't go too far wrong. So when they're writing their statement, when they're drafting ideas, if they remember, they need to demonstrate why they're applying for the course they're applying for, and they need to explain and articulate why they are right for the course. How they do this will vary, significantly from student to student, from course to course. But we find that, providing evidence to demonstrate, why they're applying, providing evidence to say why they're right for the course will really help them stand out and help them stay effective in their personal statement writing. As I said previously, each individual course, each individual university will have their own way of viewing personal statements. They'll have their own ways of marking statements, and it's also worth saying that different universities will place different emphasis on the statement depending on certain criteria. So depending on the popularity of the course, depending on the requirements for qualifications. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Students need to understand this, and they need to make sure they're providing evidence for these types of skills that universities are looking for. So on screen now are kind of some of the kind of key buzzwords that you're probably all very familiar with. But if students, as they do their research into the courses will clearly outline in their course information, in their portfolios, what they're looking for. So it might be that certain courses want students to be independent thinkers. They want students to be able to be problem solvers. They want students to be able to work independently and as part of the team. Whatever it might be, students need to identify those skills and then be able to provide evidence for that in a really kind of clear and authentic way. In terms of motivation and commitment, we'll get lots of questions from students about how do I appear authentic when I'm trying to show that I'm motivated and I'm interested in the course. Now, best way to do this is to show that students have a real interest in the course. So if they're applying for, I don't know, a history course, what have they done outside of the classroom that shows they are genuinely interested in the course? Have they read extra books? Have they maybe visited historical sites? Have they maybe watched documentaries? Whatever it might be, they should be able to pull on that and then articulate why they've done that as in relation to the course they're applying for. Again, no right way or wrong way to do this, but students are thinking about demonstrating their motivation, demonstrating they've got a bit of, I guess, ingenuity to go off and research the course will really help them stand out from the competition that's applying. So a couple of do's and a couple of don'ts, which we kind of find are helpful for students to think about when writing a statement. Firstly, structure is really important. Like with any written work, having a clear structure of how you're going to do it is really going to make sure that students are demonstrating to a university why they're applying and why they're right for the course. So in terms of structure, one that I recommend, I find useful when working with students, and this isn't the only way to do it, but is a recognised good way of doing it, is splitting the statement into 3 clear chunks. Chunk 1, about 30%, the opening, should be where a student articulates their motivation, their reasons why they're applying for the course. They maybe want to, in this, include plans for either further study or career ambitions. And this opening bit should be about 30%. Then the main chunk of their statement should be evidence in which they are showing the university, that they are genuinely interested in the course. They have done their own research. They're providing evidence that should really clearly showing they are the right person for the course. They then want, so that's about 60%, the evidence bit in the middle. And then the last 10%, the conclusion, should basically be wrapping up and summarising their why, their reasons, and a real kind of final endorsement of why they should be made an offer onto the course. I think it's really important, and especially at the moment for students who kind of lived through the pandemic over the last year or so, to make sure that their statement is written in a positive way. So it might be that they had work experience planned which had to be cancelled because of the pandemic. Instead of saying I had to cancel my work experience so I wasn't able to do any, what a student could do is kind of twist that and say, I had planned to do work experience with the local accountant. For understandable reasons, this was cancelled. What I was hoping to achieve from this was get a kind of insight into everyday practices of an accountant. And what I did is I followed up when their work experience was cancelled. I asked them a few questions. I got them to recommend a few things for me to look at, and this is what I find, and this is why I find it interesting. Again, not easy to do, but I think by doing that, students showing that they've got a bit of gumption, they've got a bit about them, and they've clearly thought about, how they can demonstrate positively their why and why they're applying for the course. So it's really, really important that throughout the statement, students are being really clear why they're applying. They should never assume that the reader has any existing knowledge of them. Because their statement is that one place to really stand out against other people applying for courses. We recommend that students start thinking about their personal statement as early as possible. So some students will start thinking about it when they're doing their GCSEs, maybe year 10, year 11. Some maybe even earlier than that. By creating a UCAS Hub account, students can do that at any age. They could be in year 7 if they want to. And in the Hub, there is a section for notes where they can start creating ideas. So maybe they've read an article, maybe they've watched a documentary, maybe they've done a particular experiment in class, whatever it is, if their students have like a log of ideas that they're building on from, I say the latest they should start it is in sixth form. When they come to actually start drafting their statement, they'll have lots of ideas to draw on and really write a strong and focused personal statement. Some of the things that we kind of would really like to highlight students not to do is listed here on the screen. So often what we'll see from students is really articulate maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs, and then the last paragraph will be either bullet points or a list of their extracurricular activities or other things that they wanted to talk about but couldn't squeeze in. So students should remember that it's about quality of information, it's not about quantity. Anything they're including in their statement should be relevant to their application. Really need to encourage them to avoid writing lists, because no one wants to read lists. No one wants just to kind of see like a bullet point of things that students done. Anything that has been included in the statement should be linked to the course, and I'll highlight a way to do this effectively in a moment. We really encourage students not to write lists. Like I said, like I mentioned on the do's page, students should be planning for their statement well in advance of actually starting to draft it. The more the kind of time they give themselves, the stronger their statement's going to be. You'll all have worked with students who leave their homework to the last minute or leave assignments to the last minute, and then you can clearly see that it's been rushed and hasn't been thoroughly thought through. As I said, there is no built-in spelling or grammar check in the statement, so students need to make sure they're being accurate with this in their own work. The use of quotes in statements is something which is often overused by students. I'm not saying that they shouldn't use them, but if they are going to use it, they need to really think why they're including a statement, a quote. So people reading statements would tend to be subject experts. They don't need a student applying for English to be quoting Shakespeare or anything like that. What they're looking for is a student's take on work, student's insight. So try and encourage students to only use quotes in a really minimal way and only where it's an effective way of making a point. Often as well, we see students use a quote to start their statement. I would recommend not doing this. Remember, the start of a personal statement should really be focusing on students' motivation and reasons for applying. A good way to help students sort of stay on track with their personal statement is any point that they include in the statement should abide by this ABC rule. So the A could be an activity, but it could be an assessment, an achievement, anything at all. But if a student's including it, why are they including it? What benefit have they gained from it? So what skills have they learned? And then crucially, how does it link to the course? So it could be anything. It could be that a student had a part-time job working in fast food. It could be that it could be anything at all. But if they're including in the statement, it has to link to the course they're applying for, especially for extracurricular activities. Often students will have a detailed paragraph about extracurricular activities, but why is it relevant to the course they're applying for? And as somebody who might be reviewing personal statements, if you can read part of your student's work and say, so what, why is it relevant? Does it apply to the ABC rule? And if it doesn't, then you need to get the students to really rethink what they're including it for. In terms of the support you offer students, I think it's really important that with your colleagues in your school or your college, you have an agreed approach in how you will support students. So, are you going to check every single draft of a statement? Probably not. If you're supporting hundreds or if not, thousands of students, it's not practical. So it might be that you say, look, you'll have 2 checks. You might say have 1 check. Whatever it is, as long as you have an agreed and a sort of standard approach across colleagues, I think you'll help your students understand what they need to do, how they need to do it. Also, I think it's important to think about when you are checking students' work, what level of detail do you want to go into in terms of kind of corrections and checking? Are you going to correct every single mistake, every single error? Some students who have maybe dyslexia, for example, you may feel that you want to support. There's no right or wrong way to do this, but having a joined up approach with colleagues will really help, and also help you save time and manage your students' expectations, so they're not coming to you every couple of days with a new draft. only when they've actually got real kind of substance for you to have a look at. So when you're looking at personal statements, you might want to think about the ABC rule. Does it apply to that? You may also want to kind of think about the questions on the screen here. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but if you're reading statements and you can kind of say yes or no to these answers, then you're probably going to be looking at a strong statement. So feel free to use this. And this is quite broad and generic sort of criteria for a statement. But if you're reading statements that can tick most of the boxes to these, then you know that the statements you're looking at are strong and are focused. You may also want to some people will have like a positives and negatives in pros and cons of each statement they look at. That's another good way of doing it. Whichever approach you decide, I think it's just important that you all agree as colleagues and as a group of people checking statements that you're all doing it in roughly the same way. There's lots of free resources available to support you in your personal statement work. So there's a link there to advice on writing personal statements. We've got lots of videos and blogs as well, and FAQs there. So when you get a copy of this presentation after today, all of the links in red will be linked to the UCAS resources about these. So do have a look at all of these pages. Lots of great information, and feel free to share these with your students as well. As mentioned previously, lots of students will feel really the need to talk about their extracurricular activities in great detail. There's some kind of tips there on the hobbies link, and also links and information around how to talk about the Duke of Edinburgh Award as well. The pointers around students writing an effective statement for multiple choices is where students might be applying for different subjects at different universities. Not saying that they shouldn't do that, but there's some kind of real practical tips about doing that for students on the link there. So moving on then from personal statements to references. Obviously, you're, as a teacher and advisor, will have a kind of different role within references depending on your own setup, but I'm going to now give you some sort of general guidance for reference writing. So the reference has the same parameters as the personal statement. So it's either 47 lines or 4,000 characters. Again, this is a sort of small, concise bit of work to support a student's application. I know this isn't always possible, but I think anyone who's writing a reference or contributing to a reference should see a copy of a student's personal statement or have a conversation with the student before starting to write the reference to make sure that the personal statement and the reference are working together in tandem and they're like complementing each other, rather than being kind of two separate pieces of work. For an admissions tutor who's reading a personal statement, it should be really obvious when they read a personal statement side by side a reference, they are talking about the same individual. The reference, like the personal statement, will be sent to all of your students' choices. So if they're applying for 5 separate choices, the same reference will be seen each choice. So you need to make sure that it is working for the most demanding and the least demanding choice on an application. It's important to think about why you're writing a reference. The reference isn't a school report. You're not talking about a student timekeeping, their kind of appearance. You're looking to provide an academic reference for a student that offers insight, offers value, and also helps them to differentiate themselves from other people applying for the same course. So in terms of things to think about when writing a reference, the advice that UCAS offers, like the advice with personal statements, is good practice only. Different universities, different colleges will have their own approach to reading references and looking through them. Unlike the personal statement, the references aren't subject to the same plagiarism checks. However, obviously, when you're writing a reference, you're doing so to add weight to a student's application, to endorse an application. So it's important that each reference has, even if it's only a small bit, personalised information, which really endorses an application for a student. We're not going to subject references to the same checks that personal statements are, but just bear in mind that the reference has to add weight to an application. Under the Data Protection Act, every student is able to request a copy of their reference directly from UCAS. So it might be that you work in a school or college that automatically shares the reference with students. We know that lots don't know, but just remember, if the student wanted to, they are able to see a copy of their reference. The next point about English or Welsh is just there for Welsh speakers. Appreciate that there's probably not many Welsh speakers or any Welsh speakers watching today, but sometimes we do see references written in a foreign language. You might have contributions from people who think like English isn't the first language. Just make sure the reference is clearly written. References often will have multiple contributors to them, but they'll only ever have one name attached to them. That would usually be either the head of sixth or the kind of head of higher education. It doesn't matter who it is, but it will be one name attached to an individual reference. In terms of advice for referees, there's some kind of real kind of basic advice that we think is really important for referees to understand. As mentioned with the personal statements, references will have different emphasis placed on them depending on the course and the institution applied for. What we do know is that courses that are highly selective, courses for subjects in professional subjects like nursing and social work, the references are going to have more emphasis placed on them than perhaps the less selective and less competitive courses. As part of the reference writing process, referees are required to provide predicted grades for pending qualifications. Really important that if students are receiving a really strong reference, but the predicted grades aren't in line, that you're explaining that and you're kind of articulating the reasons why. The next point about making sure the statement is written for the right student, it will sound really patronising, and it's not meant to be at all. We get every year, it's probably about 300 to 400 references, if not more, that are submitted for the wrong student. So it might be that somebody's collating 200-300 references for students, copying and pasting it from a separate system into the UCAS system. Once a reference has been submitted and the application has been submitted, reference cannot be changed. So make sure the reference you're attaching to the application is for the right application. Sounds really obvious and not meant to be patronising, but just make sure that is focused on. Applications don't need a reference. Now, we'd never recommend to an applicant that they should apply without a reference, but if for whatever reason they are not able to gain a reference, they don't need to have a reference on their application. Like the personal statement, reference should be a real positive document. It should be something which is focusing on the positives, it's drawing out all of the strong points of a student. As I said, it should work in partnership with the personal statement, and it should be really complementing it and adding, like it says there, meat to the bone. Highlighting students' kind of achievements and strengths, maybe even to think about using the ABC rule in reference writing to ensure that you're highlighting all of the things that you want the admissions tutors to know when making a decision on an application. Like, again, the personal statement, when reviewing references, admissions teams aren't looking for the perfect candidate. They're not looking for, straight A-star students across the board. What they're looking for is the potential to succeed in higher education. Then they want you to provide your professional judgment as a teacher, as an advisor, as to whether you think that student is capable of going on to success in higher education. You said, keeping it positive, keeping it focused. A couple of things and I'll go through some sort of top tips on how to do this in a moment. And there's a link here to some kind of more guidance on writing strong references for your students. Just wanted to briefly touch before I go into some top tips, format of references. So you may be aware for the 2021 cycle, we slightly updated our reference guidance. Now, I just want to go briefly through the classic guidance and the new 2021 guidance. So this on screen is what we see and would recommend as a classic sort of template for a reference. At the outset, you need to provide context on the school or college where a student is taking their qualifications. So you want to talk about provision, you want to talk about the type of school, the type of catchment area, and anything which is relevant to an application. You can do this through by providing a link, and I'll go on to links and how to do that in a bit more detail in a moment. You then want to be talking about any extenuating circumstances, any special circumstances that apply to an individual applicant. You then want to talk about subject by subject report, or if you're working with students who are taking BTECs or might have lots and lots of tutors, you want to be focusing on contributions that are relevant to the course they're being applied for. You want to also be focusing on the student's skills and knowledge that they've got, sort of highlighting kind of strong points of a student before you finish with a strong conclusion and endorsement. With the reference, the conclusion is the most important part. So context is key, but the concluding endorsement is really going to help your student to stand out. In terms of specifics to include, you're supporting an academic application, so primarily the focus needs to be on academic performance, especially talking about predicted grades, talking about any disparity between level 2 and predicted achievement at level 3. You want to make sure you're highlighting specific suitability and skills and requirements that a student has for the course and for higher education. This is especially relevant when you're supporting students who are applying for subjects that they might not have already studied prior to higher education. You also want to, where possible, be highlighting kind of achievements that your students have achieved. What you don't want to be doing, though, is just repeating content and information from the personal statement. So it might be that you kind of complement what's already written in the personal statement, or it might even be that you write about different and other achievements in the reference. The extracurricular activities, yes, you may want to talk about them, particularly if a student has got many strings to their bow. But again, remember that it's an academic application you're supporting. A rough guide for balance between academic and extracurricular is about 80-20. So 80% academic, 20% extracurricular. But remember, the extracurricular 20% should still be linked to the course and the skills learned by the student. Talk briefly about kind of providing context. So you've got the context for the individual school or college, but also for the individual applicant as well. If you are going to be talking about extenuating circumstances, then it's important to make sure that you're not using any extenuating circumstances as an excuse for poor performance, but actually you're using it to provide context for achievement. When thinking about these factors, you want to think about the breadth of impact and the depth of impact, and where possible, you don't want to repeat things throughout a reference. So if you are having multiple people contributing to it, what you can do is, if 3 or 4 different people all say that a student is a strong contributor in class, then you just want to highlight that once and not repeat it. So as hopefully you're aware, for the 2021 cycle, so the cycle which we are still going through at the moment, we are slightly updated and changed reference guidance as a direct kind of response to the pandemic. What we were trying to do is help teachers and advisors save time and effort when completing references. So what we've done, and I'll highlight on the next slide in more detail, is said that contextual information about a school or college is important and should be included, particularly when in sort of relation to their centre's experience of the pandemic, COVID-19. What provision were you able to provide? Were there any delays in providing online provision? What opportunities students have to kind of engage with this provision? You then want to talk about extenuating circumstances where relevant to an individual applicant as well. So here's kind of quite a neat summary, and there's a link to more detailed information here about things to include and things that are kind of optional. So the context here for 2021 applications is around COVID-19, your response, your any gaps in provision that perhaps were there. Maybe a student didn't have access to technology when working remotely, studying remotely. What we are advising is when you are writing references for students applying for these selective or professional courses, so courses like social work, nursing, that you are providing a full and detailed kind of classic reference that I talked about initially. It doesn't matter which approach that you take, applicants won't be disadvantaged with either approach. Universities and colleges know full well that there are these two different ways of doing it, and they have been advised if they want to provide or want to ask for further information, they could contact you as a referee to do so. It's worth noting as well that the guidance for 2022 references hasn't been finalised yet, so it might be that we continue this new guidance, or it might be that we revert back, and please look out for that information as soon as it's confirmed as possible. So I just wanted to provide some kind of top tips. So I talked about providing context, whether you use the classic form of reference or the new 2021 reference. Context is key. We recommend that what you do is create a page on your website which you can link to in a reference. So rather than taking up a big chunk of the reference, providing that context about an individual centre, you provide a link to a page that admissions tutors can look at, which will, explain your your individual context, your individual centre, and this obviously would need to apply to your entire cohort. As I've mentioned a couple of times, I think it's really important to reiterate, students applying for the professional courses, so like teaching, nursing, social work, these types of courses need to make sure these still have that kind of classic reference applied to them. And the last point on the board I think is really important. I think sometimes teachers and advisors get kind of slightly worried about whether they're going to be judged for their reference, for their quality of submission. The reference isn't being used by admissions tutors to judge you as a school or a college. What it's looking for is an indicator of an applicant's potential to succeed in higher education. As I said, the reference is there to provide professional judgment, which is trusted by admissions tutors on an individual's ability to succeed in higher education. So I talked about things you might want to have a URL which provides context for admissions tutors to have a look at, and we're recommending that every single centre that applies has an applications through UCAS creates this dedicated web page around kind of information for admissions teams. What you include in there is obviously going to be individual to you, but some of the things that we know admissions tutors are looking out for is how much teaching time was lost, what remote provision was available, how much disruption was there to supporting students applying through higher education, and it's going to be obviously very much individual to you, and like I said, it's not being used to judge you in any way, it's just being there to provide context for students. Your ability to provide predicted grades has probably been significantly impacted by over the last 12 months. If you wanted to kind of articulate that, maybe talk about the lack of assessments or the lack of data points, and then this would be a good place to do it as well. Then in the individual body of the reference, what you want to be focusing on, as I said, is specifics to an individual. So, did a student, was their family member, did they suffer bereavement? Would they have to self-isolate for long periods? Did they have access to technology? Did they have a reliable internet connection? Did they have any internet connection at all? Some studies, suggest that upwards of 80% of students had some disruption because of kind of the home environment. So it's, again, not being used to judge, is being there to provide context to support decision making from universities. So just before I open the floor to questions, I think it's worthwhile just kind of highlighting the reference is there, as I said, to support an application. It's being used by admissions teams to judge an applicant's potential. Try and avoid any ambiguity when you're writing a statement, writing a reference. So if you're saying something is challenging, is that good? Is that bad? Be really clear. Don't leave anything open to interpretation. Where possible, try and make it individual to each application, and where possible, again, make sure that you've had a look at the personal statement before contributing to a reference. I know it's not always possible, and it might sometimes kind of be left to the last minute, but it's worth remembering that. So I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but just wanted to highlight a couple of things. So context is key in a reference, and they're looking for that professional judgment from you. Try and avoid try and avoid repetition. If you are unsure about what to include in a reference, I would have a conversation with the student before submission. Always as well, get a second pair of eyes to check the reference before submission. You know, we do get lots and lots of applications who are submitted and referees suddenly realise that they've attached the wrong reference or they've written about the wrong student. So, you know, make sure it's been quality checked before submission. A couple of practical ideas to support you. So like with personal statements, we encourage students to start early. You can start, you know, an observation log or a reference log for students as early as possible. You know, it could be the start of sixth form, it could be year 12, could be even earlier. If you are supporting students who want to apply for the 15th of October course deadline, make sure you identify these as early as possible. At the very least, before you go off on the summer holiday, make sure that you know how many and who you're going to be supporting before possible. Said where possible, we do recommend that you look at copies of personal statement and where possible have a meeting with an individual applicant to make sure that you are both singing off the same hymn sheet and working together to write a strong application. So a couple of the key things that we think admissions tutors think are important. References need to provide insight. They need to be specific to the individual applicant. They must add value. It's not a school report. You're not saying that they've got 80% attendance, 95% attendance, whatever it might be. Be objective, be specific, add weight to an individual's application. If you haven't used our e-learning platform before, I'd really like to kind of flag it here. So it's completely free for you guys to use. We have a variety of modules on there, including an introduction to UCAS, which talks you through the UCAS process in detail. We've got a module on reference writing. We've got a guide to the 2021 application form, which is the intro to Apply 21. We'll also be launching an application module for 2022 in the coming weeks, definitely by the end of May. So do have a look at that. Free to use, but you will need to create an account before you're able to access the content. I would recommend, if you don't receive it already, sign up to receive the UCAS Advisor newsletter. This is sent out monthly or when there's key updates and information to share, and there's a link to the sign up page there already. On UCAS.com, we've got obviously lots of information for students, but we've got a dedicated section for advisors as well. So do have a look at that to kind of stay up to date with information. In the toolkits, there's lots of things, including lesson plans and activities to use with students. And then the advisor guide contains all information that you need to support students. We'll be launching the 2022 one at the launch of the 2022 cycle as well. If you need any further help with anything related to UCAS, please don't hesitate to get in contact with us, either through our dedicated schools line, via the phone or via email. If you've got any requests for training, maybe you want some additional resources to send out or anything at all, please do get in contact with us. And we'd really appreciate if you have the time, complete a really short evaluation about today's session. We're still adapting to delivering digitally and remotely, and we're kind of constantly looking to improve what we can offer. Thank you very much. I appreciate it's a long kind of presentation, lots of information checked out. I'm very, very happy to take questions and discuss anything that I mentioned today. Have there been many questions coming in, Jade?
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. We've just got the one so far. So if anybody does want to fire any more through, please do as we're chatting. Anne's asked if there are any special considerations when writing personal statements and references for those Oxbridge applications.
So for personal statements for Oxbridge applications, they tend to have slightly different requirements. and they will usually provide that guidance directly to students. Often they have to do a separate written submission as well as the UCAS application. So I would check directly with them. I'm not going to be able to give specific advice to applying to either of those, I'm afraid. I think it's, yeah, the personal statement is probably reviewed in different ways, or is reviewed in different ways depending on the institution applied for. So yeah, speak to them directly.
Great, thank you. We've not had anything else in yet so far. We'll just give people a little bit of chance to type, because I know there is a slight delay from us speaking to people hearing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was great, thank you. Really good oversight. Let's see if we've got anything else that's come in.
One thing I didn't mention, which is particularly relevant for this year, is, well, I kind of mentioned briefly about the work experience. We've had lots of questions. One of the biggest questions we're getting at UCAS at the moment is, I haven't been able to do work experience. Is this going to affect my application? And I think it's worthwhile reminding students that, you know, most people have been impacted by the pandemic in one way or another, and it's likely that other people applying will have had their chances for work experience limited as well. So just make sure that students don't kind of dwell on the negatives, but focusing on the positives in their statements.
And I think just on the back of that, sort of from a Teesside University point of view, we don't actually ask for work experience as a requirement for the course. It is one of those added extras, so it's reminding students of that as well. They've probably got lots of other transferable skills, haven't they, that they've picked up, like you've said, in part-time jobs and things, specifically for those health courses that obviously we do receive a lot of applications for at Teesside. It's not part of the entry criteria for them to have that work experience, and students of course do worry about that, so it's just reminding them, you know, that as long as they're able to demonstrate those other skills that they've developed in their personal statement, we wouldn't ever, you know, not make an offer for somebody for not having that work experience. It's one of those very much nice to haves.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I think there's very few courses, if any, at the moment, will have explicit requirements for experience.
Somebody's asked, how does the reply swap work that you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation?
Yeah, so once students record their replies through Track, they have 14 days in which they can change their replies themselves by logging into Track and just amending their replies. After 14 days, they are able to swap their replies that they've recorded. So, for example, if they've got University A, B, and C, they've firmly accepted A, insurance accepted B, and declined C. They now want to go to University C. What they need to do is contact University A, B, and C directly, ask for basically permission to make a reply swap. Universities will always, I don't think I've ever heard of university like refusing permission. What then happens is the universities will then tell us at UCAS that they're happy for their student to make a reply swap. And then once we've got permissions from each involved institution, we'll action that reply swap on behalf of the student. So the student will need to contact University A, B, and C and UCAS to basically request permission for the reply swap. The main reason that we require students to get permission is if maybe they paid sometimes they might have to pay a deposit for something, or they might have booked on to taste the lectures or taste the days or things like that. So it's just to make sure that the universities are explicitly aware.
Great, thank you. We don't seem to have had anything else come in. Obviously, you know, you shared your contact details, and if anybody does have any questions afterwards, they're very welcome to get in touch. What we will do as well is, for everybody that's attended, we'll make sure we share your slides, Charlie, won't we?
Yeah.
So that everybody has access to those. We'll just have one final check before. Yeah, nothing else has come in, so I'll just pop myself back on screen so you can see who's speaking. Great, so just to say thank you very much for that update from Charlie. It was really useful. Remind everybody that's here but that also hasn't made it to the live session that these sessions are recorded and will all be housed on our Teachers and Careers Advisor web pages on the website, so I'll send out those links shortly once they're all available. And whilst you're here, just to let you know, so we do have our last of our keynote speakers this evening, 5 till 6, who today we've got Lynn Miles, who's one of our senior lecturers at Teesside University, and she's delivering a session on trauma and adversity and the effects that has on learning. That's tonight 5 till 6. And then tomorrow afternoon 3 till 4 we have Youth Site delivering a presentation on Generation Z, which I've seen a sneak peek of this morning and looks very informative. I'm going along just to watch that as an attendee tomorrow. So please do have a look at the event calendar and book onto those sessions as well. Thank you to everyone that has attended sessions within the last 2 weeks. It's been great. We will send out a link, as I've said, with Charlie's slides, and there'll be a recording available to you as well if you want to share that with colleagues. But thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Charlie, as well, for delivering that session. Really appreciate it. We'll see you all soon. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.